Yes, this is a very special moment for many of us. This talk, in fact, in a way reflects my own journey through automation, and I would be failing in my duty if I do not share with you the fact that my journey started with partnering with Mr. Wazirani. I learned several lessons, not only in automation. Looking at his progress and what he has done in this field, in this country, make in India, I think he said it before Mr. Modi did. And he practiced it. And I've been literally an observer watching this movement happen. And I think he's done a lot of us proud. And I really would like to acknowledge. And I know that the force behind that is sitting next to him. Yes, Mala Wazirani, yes. So, in fact, I learned many things. I'll share that along as I go along. It taught me not just the fact that I came with an MD in pathology, and when I started to use the first first cell counter that came into the country at that time, that was called ERMA, and I think everybody in the field was a novice, and I was a total novice. I had absolutely no clue that cell counts can be done by machines. I had no faith in it. I had no belief in it. And you can see what has happened now, 3 decades later, how the backbone of a laboratory is the cell counter. And most of us sitting in this audience today must be part of or owning a laboratory that we are personally, completely accountable and responsible for. And so we wouldn't believe in the cell counter and this analyzer if it didn't do its job. Obviously, it's doing something really right for us to be believing and using it. So I think a little part of my talk I will share with you the steps that it has taken to evolve to be at a stage where a standalone laboratory now would like to have a 5-part differential counter while it already has a 3-part differential counter, which I think is a reality in most places. Almost every laboratory owns a 3-part differential, and sometimes it is not even a laboratory. It is a physician who owns the 3-part differential counter. And many of them do need support, and they will call you up to ask for support. We know that may not be sound laboratory practice, but we live in a country which really believes in jugaad. So there will be many instances where you can actually contribute. When you suggest and you give an opinion, the physician who runs the cell counter without the support of a laboratory qualified person, when you give, don't withhold your opinion. Tell it, and tell it honestly and clearly. He will understand the value of what you do. And that's when practices will change. It's not enough to say you have a cell counter, that's not the way to, do CBC. You should employ an MD pathology. What are you doing? No. When you share and you tell, he understands the difference between what he does intuitively and what you can contribute because of your expertise and experience. So don't give up that opportunity and be upset with the clinician. He's doing what he has to do. Okay, talking about clinicians and how we practice, if you travel across the country, you will observe, maybe many of you are from Mumbai itself, or maybe from nearby places in Maharashtra. So maybe you are used to a certain term. What's the term that you use here? CBC? I'll tell you that that's not the term in the part where I come from. They say CBP. So now I understand why it works. Because CBC should technically mean only the counts. But when somebody says CBP, he or she is also expecting So to me, it makes sense that somebody says CBP. Absolutely. I'm completely comfortable. And sometimes I feel maybe I introduced this term in the region because this was my logic. And then some people use the term hemogram. I practice in Hyderabad and I get a lot of clientele in and around either Hyderabad, even the adjoining states, Karnataka, Maharashtra, a little bit of Maharashtra also. And some people use the term hemogram. Some people say routine blood examination. What it means routine to you, what it means to say routine to her or him, it's up to you to decipher. Some people just say peripheral blood picture. So what I'm trying to drive at is, we all serve a particular community. Each of our labs serves a community that is almost dedicated to, you are dedicated to that area and that region, and you know the end user. So it's good to know what they say and what you understand. Are you on the same page? Otherwise, introduce the terms that you would prefer. It's okay. It doesn't matter whether you say this, I say this. Ultimately, we should serve the purpose that it is meant for. So the terminology that is used on the request forms, you should be able to apply the right one. And then I don't know if you get this in this part of the country. We have these combos, like MAC combos. They say HBPCV. Do you get these? You get these? No more in Mumbai. But yeah, that was my point. They say HBPCV, TCDC. Somebody will say platelet count. I mean, he's interested only in the platelet count. But you're not going to do only a platelet count, right? You are going to run it on your cell counter, and you're going to generate all the values that the instrument is going to give you. So what's the point of these combos? So we can work towards, obliterating this only French fries, only the ketchup. It's like saying HB, give me only HB, give me only the ketchup. It's like that. So, and also it kind of changes the way people think. If you look at antenatal practice, many obstetricians they often are interested only in hemoglobin. They want to know if that pregnant woman has anemia or not. Okay? But now you are wanting to play a bigger role than just telling whether there is anemia or not. How are you going to pick up all those thal carriers who are all walking in the forms of, future mothers? One way to pick them up is during their antenatal screening. Every pregnant mother, every pregnant woman reaches an obstetrician these days. Every pregnant woman in India, in urban and semi-urban areas, will reach her obstetrician. So if you can educate, if you can partner with the obstetrician and tell them that just HB is not enough, you please, in the beginning, just bring the cost down. That's what we do. I don't know how much you charge for a hemoglobin. If somebody asked only for hemoglobin, let us say you 30 rupees. I'm just taking it off the top of my head. You say, pay 40 rupees and I'll give you, and the patient will go away with a complete blood picture. Tell them, if you do this, we will pick up thalassemia carriers. If you pick up antenatal mothers who are carriers, you are going to be an active contributor to the prevention of the birth of children with thalassemia major. This one strategy can make a huge change in what is going to happen to the future of our communities. So tell them, educate them that just asking for one parameter. The first time during the antenatal checkup, definitely don't ask for hemoglobin alone. We will offer all of it together. So combos, please delete as far as possible through communication and education, not by refusing to do. Don't do that. It never works with clinicians. Okay, those of you who were there in the hall yesterday know this. Earlier, when we had to generate a report for a complete blood picture, we had to individually perform several tests, individually, separately, using different techniques. Each one of them is a different technique, has a different principle, requires separate effort, different kind of manpower, skill, and then your own time behind the microscope, and then you would generate this one report. So, remember that what you are issuing out as one report is actually a series of reports. It's not the series of parameters. It became series of parameters because of the fact that there is one cell counter. So now you get a series of values and it becomes one report because it all runs inside the machine. A lot of things are happening. Just like you did several techniques to arrive at the parameters, the instrument is doing that too. So is that not a superhuman thing? The cell counter is doing everything that many people used to do to generate one report. When a sample comes to you in the laboratory, what is it that is expected of you? Because you are a consultant, you must never forget that at the end of a series of reports or values, just as Dr. Manchanda mentioned in the coagulogram, the screening coagulogram, at the end of it, she emphasized that the last sentence, impression, that's where your expertise comes. Your expertise, my expertise comes in. That is where you build a rapport with your clinician. If you just keep releasing printouts with multiple values and all of them, I'm a slightly sometimes old school. I go back to being old school. You know, when we used to write reports with a pen, I think there was one advantage. If I had to say mild shift to left, I could kind of put it in italics, I could underline, or I could put it in a different font. If I want to say platelets slightly decreased or moderately decreased, I could use some, my handwriting would vary a little. Now you get reports which are really smart, completely computerized. If it is computerized, our public believes that it is, gold standard. The computer has given the report. But I think there is more value when the human intervention is there. So all reports look, all the values you see now, they look so beautiful. Like nowadays, in the cities, it's very difficult to see young girls with different kind of teeth. Earlier we had Maushami Chatterjee with one crooked tooth. And so she had her own charm. And Sharmila Tagore had a different kind of, all those contributed to the variety and they drew attention. I'm drawing your attention to the fact that it could draw your attention to a particular feature. Now, these monotonous reports, it is likely that in the bunch of reports file that the clinician sees, he misses out something that you want him to look at. So, personally, I never cringe from writing under the computerized report. After all that, I would either underline the beautifully computerized printout or put an asterisk, bring out, focus, draw his attention to the fact that you want him to look at that. Because this is a test that is run in large numbers in the laboratories. You can't call up your clinician for every sample. So, but you would like to make your mark, you would like to draw his attention, so you could use some method. So, make sure that you do that. You add value by adding your own inputs. Look at it, interpret it. Don't give sets of values. Give that report a character. It's your character, your attitude. You reflect on that report. So, you report either in the affirmative. Say that it is iron deficiency anemia. It is suggestive of iron deficiency anemia. You suggest that there should be an evaluation for a carrier status because the MCV is low and the RDW is normal. So you can say suggest a direction for the next step of evaluation. Always play a role in patient management by doing so. Okay, and this is when you become an expert. This is when you get counted as an expert. And then, if often standalone labs serve the purpose of a catchment of patients. The patient will repeatedly come to your lab. If there's a thrombocytopenia, an ITP patient being treated, he will constantly come back to you because he knows how important the platelet count is. His clinician will ask him, which lab did you go to? What? So because he wants to look at how reliable it is. And if the same patient comes to you, now there's enough software in your computer to track patients' histories, so you can predict trends. So if there's an ITP who's coming to you and the platelet counts, you have a series of platelet counts over the past 6 weeks. You yourself can say, you can add a note, reviewed reports from, this is what I do, reviewed reports of 16/10/2017, platelet count now, and he knows that you're talking about something that he also cares about. Give a diagnosis is your primary role. If possible, provide information on an associated condition. Like there is a leukopenia, there is a thrombocytopenia, and you've detected malaria. Mention that. Maybe there are virocytes and there is leukopenia, and you can say that you suggest a viral infection that's associated. You can alert them to comorbidities. So suggest whatever you can and document whatever is of value. And yes, what we do, I do not know what each one of you practices individually, but in my laboratory, what I do is I file the slides of today. Today is what, Sunday? So Sunday's slides are put in a box that is labeled Sunday, and all the slides, smears of that day are filed in that box. Next Sunday, these slides will get emptied, and that Sunday's slides will get stored into that box. Monday, there is another box. So the Monday slides of last Monday are taken out and replaced. In case the patient comes back to you or comes to you for, say again, maybe a thrombocytopenia, you know, Monday the count was this, Monday this is what you gave, this is what you saw, and you can review it. Okay, so this is a very small thing that we do, but it comes very handy when we are working with patients. They develop a certain sense of confidence in what you do. So small little things you can do your own innovations in your own laboratory and in the context in which you are delivering your reports. This is a journey with the cell counter, every step of which has been significant. Every time something has happened in the automation in cell counting, it has led to some kind of learning for all of us who are involved with this. So this is what I would like to, if you recapitulate, it was very interesting. This is when I started practicing pathology after my MD, and back then I thought, I had nobody to talk to about automation. I don't know, and that time we didn't even have these phones, so we didn't know whom to talk to. The only person I spoke to, I think, was Mr. Vazirani, if I had a problem, and I had lots of problems. The one thing that I learned from Mr. Vazirani through that journey was, every time I had a problem and I would call in, very deeply frustrated, I was expecting that this machine was sitting in the lab. I don't know if he knows this. This is a confession. I had this cell counter in my lab, and I was expecting that it will do everything. I mean, that's what it's meant for. Like, you have the dishwasher, right? So dishwasher should wash dishes. Cell counter should count cells. And if they are not corresponding to what I want from it, there's something wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with me. Everything's wrong with that. So he corrected that for me. You need to be a lifetime student when you use anything that is, anything in fact, but when you're using something that you have not been trained, then you need to really be an active learner. I learned several such lessons through this journey with the cell counters. So at that time, the cell counters had just come in, and look at what's happening now. Almost everything that more than what you thought was possible, the instruments are giving you now. More than what you ever expected. Now you don't know what to do with the information they're giving. Earlier you wanted them to give you the information. Now we are trying to race with the information that the machine is giving. Right? So we need to be really educated. So when this was just a recapitulation, if I look back, in the 1980s, in India, the particle counters had started to be used, and I think we were the first ones to use a particle counter in the combined state of Andhra Pradesh at that time in 1986. And by that time, the developed world had already gone to this level of giving out parameters on WBCs. And we had no clue that we would reach there, but we have reached there. 1980s, by 2000s, within 2 decades, we were catching up with them. We were catching up with what's happening in the developed countries. And now, in today's world, they give everything. We are on par as far as technology is concerned with the developed countries. But we lag behind in being able to make this accessible, make it affordable for us as laboratory professionals and therefore to the patients. And we need to make these parameters acceptable to the users. So the clinicians who receive these reports must know what it is. Before our clinicians know what it is, we need to know. So this is the gap that we are now, it is, I think, the need of the hour to bridge this gap. Some of us sometimes need to pretend that we know. And it is sad, but we do. But we do. We don't know what it is, but we can't appear ignorant in front of the clinician. So we say, yeah. You know? So we need to fill these gaps. Or we just change the topic. The clinician also does it often, so he knows what you're doing. The journey of the automated cell counter started with a very simple principle. It still is the gold standard. It will still hold true much after all of us have practiced for all our lives. It will still hold true. It is the basis of cell counting. I don't need to expand on that. But the thing is, we didn't stop there. We added much, much more to that. So principles, now let's see what these principles, how they are converted into results for us. There are parameters. This is something that all of us must know. We must know. If we knew and maybe we forgot, but it's good to revise. There are some parameters that are directly measured by the instrument, and those are the ones on which everything else is based. So we must know that when we are looking at the instrument and when we are looking at our controls, the values for these parameters are the ones that will decide all other parameters. So if you talk about day-to-day practice, just look at when you run your control, are these parameters within range? Are they acceptable to you? Because everything else that comes will be based on, will be derived from these. But then, the simple Coulter principle, everybody accepted and everybody started applying it. Instruments started coming, but then they didn't stop there. This is where another learning happened for me, and probably for anybody else who's ready to learn. When you do something and you have something, don't rest. Refine it. And that's where the journey gets interesting. So they didn't stop. They made these, and who did all this? It was not the laboratory people, it was not the laboratory people, it was not the physician, it was not a scientist with a PhD. These were engineers who created all this. So, another lesson learned. Interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary conversations are the only way we can progress. The only way we can learn is, not one pathologist talk to another pathologist. Try and talk at least to the microbiologist. You will pick up something. You'll pick up something about staining, about microscopy, about immunofluorescence, anything. Now, if you were to talk to a physician, you would really be able to be a partner in patient management. So if that's what you enjoy, you do that. I enjoy that, so that's what I do. But if you are wanting to really break barriers, you must converse, not just keep challenging the others by saying, you did this, but it's not useful to us. वो कुछ काम नहीं करता है, क्या फ़ायदा, इतना पैसा दे के खरीदा. Don't take that tone. You have a conversation, which means feedback is important. Tell them what you are looking for and why, how. That's not being served by what they have given you. And then that will be the point of change for the other person. He thinks of what you need, because the engineer cannot imagine what you want, right? He's trying to apply what he knows to deliver what you want to deliver. So unless you tell your mother exactly how you want your sambar, you may not get sambar, it may be some dal, right? So communications and conversations are very important. And I learned this because, they started doing all this very refined stuff. They said, the fluid is, if we can restrict this backflow of the cells, then this duplicate counting of the cells can be prevented. I'm just taking an example that I understood. Much of that engineering which I don't understand. Then not only this, they also started looking at how to develop the rest of it. While the fluidics person is looking at this, the person who handles the electronics is looking at how to refine this information, how to not have this bifid pulses. So developments have been happening in every aspect. And then this kind of transformed the way so many things happen in hematology. The fluidics. The fluidics, because everything that is done in the cell counter, everything that is done subsequently in the highly evolved, very refined form of fluidics is the flow cytometry, where you want one cell to go tapak, tapak, tapak under that, across that field of laser beam. Just look at the brilliance of the person who created that. So the fluidics expert has further refined, and he has contributed this kind of flow so that these cells don't clump together and they get counted as one. This gets counted as one. How to stop all that from happening? So the engineers must have, had a dinner together. So this is what comes out of dinners together. So this journey is truly been a miracle. Now, I think I always thought that I was resourcefully challenged. That's one way of saying I can't afford it. Huh? So you use the positive interpretation of those words, and you say, I always thought we were resource challenged, because neither our labs are able to stay updated by purchasing the next version. The engineers bring out the next version faster than I can pay the loan for the previous one. So what to do? So resource challenge to wo zindagi bhar hota hi rehta hai. You can't, it's difficult to race with it. But now I find that I am also technologically challenged. The kind of advancements that are happening are phenomenal. I confess, I do not understand the current version of the cell counters. And maybe you can put together some programs to educate us. And that's how fast things are developing. And so we need to understand at least the basics. If we understand our 3-part differential and our 5-part differential, which are serving the purpose in our laboratory bench, then we have done a lot of good service. So the 5-part now gives you, because it uses techniques not just of the Coulter principle, it uses all the possible technology that is available and puts together. There are different machines that use different technology. We're not going to talk about that because that's a whole day, I'm sure. So each one uses different techniques, principles, and generates this kind of interpretive value. Okay, so we have, because optical scattered, somebody who is very good at optics has been able to use that principle in identifying the nature of every single particle that crosses the path of light. How? Because light will get scattered differently, reflected differently, diffracted differently when it is intercepted by a particle which is complex. Not just like a red cell, but if there is a granulocyte with lot of granules, it's still, the light, the way the light gets dispersed from through the cell is different. And not only this, these diffractions have to be captured. So somebody has to design a sensor that will be sensitive enough to pick up all these. When you understand the miracle that the cell counter is, you will really fall in love with that. And then came the when flow cytometers came, then we realized that these same principles could be used in routine cell counting. So what do we use? We use markers, fluorescent markers. Either they identify the biochemical properties or the antigenic property, and then they use these features, which means what? Either the peroxidase enzyme gets identified, or in the example of, say, platelet counting, the platelet protein, surface protein gets identified. So they are very specific and they are very precise too. So now we have instruments that tell us the reticulocyte count. We know that it is so. How do they do that? By having a fluorochrome or a dye that will stain. It's like a supravital stain. It will stain the RNA, and because of that, what has happened is that it is possible to, it has now permitted us to identify not just reticulocytes, but because the amount of RNA is different in a mature reticulocyte versus an immature reticulocyte, it gives you a component that says immature reticulocyte. It identifies. It's useful for you to interpret what's happening to a marrow that is recovering from an insult. So all this has clinical interpretive value. The number of instruments that are available now, I don't know how many there are. There are so many. But the major companies that give us these cell counters are still these, most across definitely in India. Now we'll just look at a few examples, very few examples of what these 3-part and 5-part differentials look like to us at the end of all these this work. When you look at this is a 3-part counter, differential counter. What I was trying to tell you, all these are numbers. So unless you are able to focus and look at each one of them separately, you may miss out on something important. Another way of using that is to look at the histograms. I've just magnified one histogram to show you how it's useful. This is a histogram that is depicting the WBC's spread. X-axis is the size, the Y-axis is the complexity of the cell, and we know that the larger cells will be farther away from the origin, the smaller cells will be closer to the origin. Based on this, these are identified as, this is what the instrument does. It doesn't know the names, lymphocyte, granulocyte. It just looks at the size and then it gives you these graphs. So you should know that the names are given by us. What it gives is this data. These are terminology that we have fixed, okay? So we should know what these represent. So the ones that are close, the same kind of principle applies for the RBC as well as the platelets. Look at this peak. Now, in this peak, what we can see, this is the RBC histogram. What it's showing is that it's a uniform, a beautiful curve, fairly uniform kind of RBCs. Here, the platelets, all of them conform to one peak, similar size of platelets. So it tells us that they're probably in the normal distribution. 5-part differential, this is a bit more interesting, colorful, grabs your attention. So if you look at the screen, you're not going to look at the printout, color printouts of all of them. But if you could make a habit of just keeping a watch on what's happening on the screen, then you'll pick up these. This is the normal distribution. And this is how the data will be. This is the scattergram from which these figures are generated. You should be very familiar with these positions, because then when there is another like this, look at the distribution, it's different. So you know that this is a smear that you would want to pay some attention to. As you look at the screen, you can pick out which are the ones. And you can, if you are a lab that's handling, say, 100 or 150 or maybe 200 samples a day, your technician can be sensitized to this. And so you will, if not screen all of them, I personally screen all of them because I don't have too high a load and I believe in microscopy. So I do. But your technician can be trained and they would pick up these smears and put them aside. It's important before we interpret all these values to know that all of them also come with certain limitations. When you know what the limitations are, you use them wisely, you use them smartly. So what are the limitations? The first thing is to reiterate the fact that there are some values that are inherently counted and measured by the instrument and the others are derived. Okay? That's one thing we should never forget. So in hemoglobin estimation, just like how you do in the manual hemoglobin interpretation, what interferes if there is anything that increases the turbidity of the blood, then it's bound to affect the value that it generates. So any factor that causes increase in turbidity will interfere with hemoglobin estimation. The other parameters, we'll look at them. Now you know that hematocrit, although now it has come to pass that hematocrit is thought of as being equal to PCV. In fact, PCV is a term that is kind of getting obliterated. They say hematocrit, but you should know that hematocrit on these instruments is not directly measured. It is derived from these parameters. What are the parameters? You look at that. PCV, the factors that, so MCV, it is obtained from the RBC count and the mean corpuscular volume. So anything that leads to fallacious counts of these two is also bound to give a fallacious hematocrit. So when you do hematocrit, know that. Sometimes in our lab what we do is we do a PCV, either capillary, often a capillary because that's much simpler to run. We do a capillary, we do one of two parameters along with all the samples. Again, old school thinking, for all the samples that come on a given day, HB will be done, or randomly on another day, I'll say, aaj PCV karo. That helps in a few things. One, it helps me to look at the instrument value, whether it's okay. Second, if there's a mislabeling, I pick it up. So, or if there's a sample that is lysed, I'm able to pick it up. So I'm able to pick out these ones that will contribute to errors by doing. And that also keeps my staff on toes. If everything the machine is doing, agar sabji to apne aap kaato na, tadka to apne aap do na, namak khud dalo na, pura, you can't put it in the oven. It doesn't give you the flavor that you want, right? So my staff also knows that they have a role in the laboratory. They have, and being conversant with manual methods is very important. On a day when you have a problem sample, you can't expect to solve the problem suddenly with technicians who are not familiar with the technique. So these are the reasons why I do that. Sources for, again, it's related to the parameters from which it is derived. It's the same for all this. I won't run through that. Okay, let's look at the WBC histograms. Where can the fallacies be? Oh, I'm sorry, this is not so visible maybe. If you look at how the histogram of the WBC looks like, then you will yourself be able to tell where the fallacies can come. The lymphocytes here, see the lymphocytes are here. And if there are slightly larger lymphocytes, they shift only slightly on the histogram depicted on the screen. So you can mistake these for this or these for this. Most often these can be missed if you are looking only at the instrument. And you look at the blasts, they are not very far from the large or variant lymphocytes. So your machine, especially the three-part differential, is not going to pick up these cells. You have to be alert and you have to screen the smear to pick up these small blasts. It's not going to pick up. So be clear. And These eosinophils, see where they are. They are almost in the region of what this instrument will pick up as immature granulocytes. So if there is an eosinophilia and your machine is not giving eosinophilia, don't blame the instrument. The technique, there is a limitation in the way it looks at it, therefore it is not. Don't say कि ये गलत है instrument. That's where your intervention is required and you should intervene. In addition to all this, there are problems that are inherent to the sample itself, and those are many in themselves. Any of these can lead to a false hemoglobin value, any of these, because ultimately the cell counter is looking at each and everything as a particle. It is segregating them into different compartments based on the thresholds that are laid down for the size of those particles. So if there are minute fragments of RBCs, they could get counted as WBCs. They could get counted even as platelets. Large platelets can get counted as RBCs. If there is marked microcytosis, you may have a thrombocytosis. So know that these are all because of the way it is, what is the principle behind it. So in fact, all of them are related to that. It's just listing of lot of situations where these happen. You can maybe look it up. So sample variables, instrument variables, what is the inherent, the principle behind which your instrument in your lab works, you should know. And then you will be able to identify where you can expect to miss findings. But some things have not changed. That is, at least not yet. I don't know if there is going to be a cell counter that you can run through the vein or the radial artery and then it will tell you, it will generate. Maybe somebody is working on it. It will give you a cell count. Maybe it will. Why not, right? We didn't think this much would happen, so maybe that will happen. But we're still dependent as of now on proper sample collection with a proper anticoagulant to sample ratio. These have not changed. If you have not attended to these, don't expect the machine to be so smart that it will correct all these. It will not. So it's been an interesting journey, and I still continue to enjoy this journey. It's always a challenge to look at what cell count. I'm almost scared. It's like an exam. It's like a DNB exam. When somebody comes up and says, when Kanchan says, this instrument, she doesn't know that I'm scared of her. She'll say, it'll give these parameters. Now I have to go figure out what to do with it, how it is generated, and so they are posing us challenges, so we have to continue to learn because they are advancing much faster than our knowledge in this field is advancing. Because we think we are so busy learning so many things in hematology, lots happening. Well, we've come a long way, I can say that. This is what was there in the beginning. Not many, automation was not a concept that we trained in. When I did my pathology, nobody told me, not because they didn't want to tell me, it wasn't a secret, but nobody taught us that, there will be automation. So we didn't know. When I came out immediately after my MD, this instrument was sitting and I was sitting in front of it. The instrument and I subsequently became friends. So we were like, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know whom to approach. We didn't have people to talk to when we had a problem. Like I told you, the only person I could talk to was Mr. Vazirani, and I don't know if I taught him hematology. He taught me a lot of automation. So we were in that kind of environment, and we were also, mentally we were like this. I've invested very heavily on this instrument, so it should do everything, like I was telling you earlier. So why is it not doing? But now I think we've all moved on from there. Now I think pathologists and laboratory consultants are more open to understanding what it is that they should expect. I'm glad the next generation is better than us. So there was no working knowledge of the instrument. We didn't have. We had service engineers. Actually, literally speaking, my service engineer was Mr. Vazirani, because he was the one who used to attend to my complaints. So don't you see that we've come a long way? You have so many people who can help you with service now. So we've really come a long way. And so there's a lot of hope for the future too. There was no interfacing. What came out of the instrument, you had to write it and you had to give it. There were no, for reagents also we used to have a problem. If we ran out of the diluent, they would say, oh, China se aa raha hai, ya, it's on the sea between Germany and India. We used to get these, anybody recalls that? वो reagent आ रहा है, आ जाएगा, port पे आ जाएगा. We don't have those problems now. We really have bridged all those gaps thanks to the robust industry. We are no longer loner users. All of us are users. We are a community of users now. And there was also, back then, there was no concept of having a backup. If you had an instrument, you thought you had put all your money on it and you expected it to do, and so you could do without one technician at least in your lab, and then you definitely couldn't have another instrument. But now we know that when we depend on automation, it's also important to invest on some form of backup. Even if it is a tie-up with another lab, even that is a backup. But when you have automation, please have backup. Very important. These are lessons that we have, several levels of learning that we have crossed, and I'm glad we have done it. So there are many parameters that are available now. Like I said, we are trying to interpret those values. We are in the process of learning of what to do with the parameters that the instrument is giving. But having learned what is the value of RDW, I know that we will learn every parameter that the instrument gives. We will find an application for the parameters that are generated by the instrument. Having said that, you should know what you expect from automation. Know that it gives you all these, but it is your opinion that will make the maximum contribution. I'll end with this. Most machines do better than an average man. Most machines, if they are well maintained, they will perform better than an average man, or sometimes even a very good, a genius. But no machine can replace an extraordinary person. What makes you extraordinary is your willingness to apply what you do in the lab to the patient community that you serve. It's okay if you are not doing molecular genetics. You are reporting on a very basic and very fundamentally useful parameter. That is, you call it CBC, CBP, hemogram. I'll leave that to you. That's up to you. But you must learn to be a contributor to that report that is generated. Include your opinion. Be a consultant. Don't be somebody who owns an instrument and gives a printout from an instrument. Anybody can own an instrument, but you own the report. Ultimately, the machine is not accountable. You are. I am. Machine will do just that much. Thank you for your very patient hearing.